Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. So today we're going to be taking a look at this article from TATANKA, and it was published just recently, January 7th, 2025. And it really dives into this whole thing with meta and content moderation. It's pretty thought-provoking, to say the least.
Yeah, it is. What really got me thinking was how they used this fictional story, almost like a case study, kind of woven throughout the piece to really bring to light, um, what could happen if these companies like Meta are prioritizing profits over the people who are actually using their platforms, especially when it comes to the information we're all exposed to online. It's a pretty slippery slope.
It is, and they don't hold back. Like right off the bat, they're laying it out. Meta's getting rid of those third-party fact checkers,
Yeah.
and they're basically loosening up the rules, the reins on content moderation across all their platforms. And the reason,
Involving free speech. And that's where this article really digs in. It challenges that whole idea. They're arguing that this isn't really about free speech, at least not in the traditional sense of empowering marginalized voices. Instead, they're suggesting that Meta's kind of using free speech as this convenient label for a strategy that's, more about boosting their engagement and ultimately their bottom line. But the problem is, and what the article really highlights, is that this could come at a real cost,
yeah,
potentially making these platforms less safe for users, especially those who are already part of vulnerable communities.
so what you're saying is this move that they're making to increase free speech could actually end up silencing the very people that it's supposed to be protecting.
That's exactly what the article is arguing. It's kind of this ironic twist on the whole concept. And they have this really powerful quote in there that really sums it up. It says, "Free speech should empower and amplify voices that have been historically silenced, not serve as a shield for the amplification of harmful speech." It's a pretty bold statement.
It is. It is. So if they're getting rid of fact checkers, what are they replacing them with? What's the plan?
Okay, so they're proposing this new system called community notes. And essentially, it's kind of like a crowdsourced moderation thing, right? Where users can flag content, and that kind of becomes the new way of checking things. It's actually pretty similar to what Elon Musk has on X, what used to be Twitter. But the article really kind of questions whether that approach is actually effective. Is that
Yeah.
really going to work?
Yeah. I mean, on the surface, you would think the wisdom of the crowd, like a bunch of different perspectives, that'd be a good thing, right? What do they think the problems are with that kind of system?
So their concern is that this system, both Meta's and the one on X, could be easily manipulated, right? If enough people are pushing a certain narrative, even if it's misinformation, it could just sort of slip through the cracks. And suddenly you've got this situation where things are spreading unchecked just because enough people are vouching for it, even if it's not true. It kind of creates this wild west of information where truth gets lost in all the noise.
Oh, I see. So it's like you might think you're getting all these different perspectives and a more balanced view, but actually it could be a bunch of misleading stuff all packaged together to look credible.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a false sense of security. And it gets even more interesting, I think, when you start to consider the timing of all this. The article points out that, this announcement from Meta coincides with, the potential return of Donald Trump to power. It's like, is there something else going on here?
Wait, are they implying that Meta's intentionally trying to sway things politically?
Well, they don't come right out and say that, but they definitely highlight the potential consequences. They're saying, look, looser moderation right when Trump is stepping back into the political arena could lead to this environment where misinformation and all this really divisive rhetoric just thrives. And that, of course, could impact elections and, just public discourse in general. There's a line in the article that says, "The timing of Meta's announcement is not coincidental. It aligns suspiciously with the political winds shifting in favor of Donald Trump's return to power." And it definitely makes you think.
No kidding. Okay, so just to recap, we've got Meta potentially putting profits ahead of people, this whole twisted interpretation of what free speech really means, a moderation system that seems, well, questionable at best, and now maybe a potential link to some political maneuvering. It's
a lot to unpack, for sure. And it really hits home when you get to the story of Mala Zar. She's a Palestinian Muslim queer woman, and her experiences are kind of woven throughout the article to really illustrate how these changes at Meta could actually play out in the real world, with real people. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah. And I'm guessing it doesn't paint a very pretty picture. What happens to her?
So at first, Mala finds community and belonging online, which is awesome. But then after these changes at Meta are implemented, Her safe spaces basically get flooded with like hate speech and misinformation. And it's like her voice, along with so many others like hers, is just increasingly drowned out in all the noise.
So she kind of becomes, in a way, like a victim of the very thing this article is warning about,
Yeah.
the silencing of marginalized voices under the guise of free speech.
Right. And the article really uses her story to drive home the point that these changes at Meta could actually lead to more harassment and silencing of these vulnerable groups, which, completely contradicts the whole idea of what free speech is supposed to be about. It's like they've completely flipped the script.
Yeah, it's almost like they've taken this concept of free speech and, I don't know, weaponized it or something, like
Yeah.
turning it into a tool to make online spaces less safe, especially for people like Malala.
Yeah.
But does she just like sit back and take it? I mean, what does she do?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Instead of giving up, she actually fights back. She reclaims her narrative, starts writing her own story, and even begins connecting with other people to try and build these alternative platforms where, truth and inclusivity are actually prioritized. She's like, I'm not going to let this happen.
Wow, that's incredible. So she's like taking matters into her own hands, creating the kind of digital space she wants to see in the world. It's like this David and Goliath situation. But instead of a slingshot, she's using her voice and the power of community to make a difference.
Exactly. And that's what makes her story so powerful and inspiring. It shows that even in the face of these huge corporate decisions, individuals and communities still have the power to push back and create spaces where everyone can feel safe and heard. And it's that resilience that really shines through in this quote from the article where Mala says, I began working with the coalition to build a new platform, one that prioritized truth, safety, and the voices of marginalized communities.
That's so inspiring.
Yeah.
So what about TATANKA? What's their overall take on all this? Like, what's their stance?
Oh, they definitely don't mince words. They see Meta's actions as a straight-up betrayal of the communities they claim to serve. And they're not just calling them out, they're actually issuing a call to action. They're basically saying, look, we need to demand better from these tech companies, hold them accountable for the harm they're causing, and support the creation of these alternative platforms where ethical considerations actually come first. It's about putting people before profits.
Yeah, it's not just about complaining. It's about actually taking steps to try and make things better. It's about taking action. But before we get into all of that, I kind of want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we've learned so far. Just to kind of recap.
That's a good idea. There's a lot to unpack here.
Okay, so we've got Meta making these huge changes to their content moderation policies. And they're saying it's all in the name of free speech, right? But this article we're deep diving into is suggesting that it might actually be more about profits than principles, and that this whole shift could have some pretty serious consequences, especially for communities that are already marginalized.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. And it's not just theoretical, right? The article uses Mala's story to really illustrate how these changes could actually lead to an increase in hate speech, the spread of misinformation, and just the overall silencing of voices that desperately need to be heard. It's a cautionary tale for sure, but it's also a story about hope and resilience, which is important.
Absolutely. I mean, Mala's journey really brings that human element to this whole complex issue.
It does. And despite all those challenges, it shows that we're not powerless in the face of these massive corporations. We can actually do something.
We can create change, fight back, and actually build these alternative spaces where people are put first. It's about taking back control of our digital lives and really shaping a future where everyone can thrive online.
You got it. And that brings us right back to that central question this article raises. Is Meta really championing free speech, or are they just prioritizing profits over people?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's something that we all need to be thinking about. It's a question that impacts all of us. It's about who gets to control the information that we see, who has the power to speak, and whose voices end up getting silenced. And those are questions we need to be asking ourselves, not just about Meta, but about the entire digital landscape. So stay tuned, because we'll be right back after a quick break to really dive into what we can do to make sure online spaces stay safe, inclusive, and truly representative of all the diverse voices out there. It's kind of crazy how all of this, this whole conversation about Meta and content moderation, it brings up this much bigger issue.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's this, I guess, this tension between free speech and, responsible content moderation.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Right.
like, how do you find that balance between two things that are both so important, but also, can totally clash with each other? You've got this fundamental right to freedom of expression, which is, the cornerstone of any democracy.
Oh, absolutely. It's about, being able to exchange ideas freely and have open debates and all of that.
Right. But then at the same time, you also have to think about protecting people from harm, right?
Hmm.
Especially with these social media platforms and the power they have. I mean, their algorithms can amplify things so quickly, and unfortunately, that includes harmful content too.
Yeah, and I guess that's the tightrope that Meta's trying to walk here, right? They're saying they want to promote free speech, but this article is arguing that they might actually be, falling off that tightrope and landing right on the side of profits.
Yeah, and that's a valid concern. And it's something that we as users, we have to be aware of this, but what can we actually do about it? Do we just have to sit back and accept whatever these tech giants decide?
Well, not necessarily. The article actually ends on a pretty hopeful note. They argue that the solution really lies in collective action. It's about holding these companies accountable, you know, demanding transparency in how their algorithms actually work, and making sure that they're not just prioritizing engagement at all costs. It's got to be about more than that.
So it's not just about like complaining on Twitter, it's about actually trying to take steps to make things better.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our digital spaces and shaping them into something that benefits everyone, not just the corporations that are running them.
Right, right. That makes me think about Malaw's story. It would have been so easy for her to just give up and stay silent, but she chose to fight back, which is incredible.
Yeah, her story is a perfect example of how we can push back against these systems, right? It's about demanding better from the platforms we use and supporting the development of these alternatives that actually prioritize ethical considerations. That's what we need more of.
Like those platforms that Malaw was working to build,
Mm.
right? The ones that are actually designed with good intentions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Platforms that are designed for the ground up to foster, healthy dialogue, protect vulnerable communities, and make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard. That's the goal.
It's a great goal. It's a powerful idea. But let's be realistic for a second. These big tech companies, they have a lot of power and influence.
Yeah.
It can feel pretty daunting to try to change things, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they do. They do. But we have to remember that we have power as users too. I mean, let's be real. These platforms rely on our participation, right? They need us to keep using their services, keep engaging with their content. If
Mhm.
we weren't there, they wouldn't be anything.
So you're saying that if enough of us, start choosing to support platforms that align with our values and we hold the others accountable, we can actually start to shift that balance of power.
Exactly. It might not happen overnight, but it's a fight worth having. It's about creating a digital landscape that is more equitable, more just, one where everyone has a voice and feels safe. That's what it's all about.
That kind of reminds me of that Margaret Mead quote. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Oh, that's a great quote. And it's so relevant to this conversation, because it highlights the power of collective action, even when you're going up against something as massive as these, tech giants. It's easy to feel small and powerless, but when we come together and demand better, we can actually make a difference. We can make change.
Yeah, I love that. So even though this article, it brings up some really serious concerns, it also kind of leaves you with this sense of hope, right? Like it reminds us that we're not at the mercy of these companies. We have options.
And that we have a responsibility, a responsibility to shape the digital world into something we can all be proud of, something that reflects our values.
It's about finding that balance between the incredible potential of technology and the very real need to protect ourselves and each other from the potential harms that come with it. And speaking of harms, Mala's story was such a powerful reminder of how these abstract decisions that are made at the corporate level can actually have very real and very personal consequences for people. We can't forget that.
Yeah, I agree. Her journey was it was something else. What about it resonated with you the most?
Good question. I think for me, it was her refusal to be silenced. Even when it seems like, the algorithms were working against her, she found ways to make her voice heard, to connect with others who understood her experience, and to keep fighting for a better digital future. It's like a reminder that even small acts of resistance can create this ripple effect. They can spark change. And that brings us to the heart of what this whole deep dive is really all about. It's all about becoming more conscious, more aware of how we interact with these digital spaces, how we use them, what we put out there.
And recognizing that we actually have a choice.
Yeah, a choice to either passively accept the digital world as it is with, all its flaws and inequalities and all that.
Or we can actively try to make it better, make it something we're actually proud of.
It's like that old saying, be the change you want to see in the world. but like applied to our online lives, our digital selves.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility for the kind of digital environment we're creating, both for ourselves and for, the generations that are coming after us. We can't just leave them with this mess.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about individual actions either, right? It's about working together, collectively holding these tech companies accountable, you know, supporting ethical alternatives, and using our voices to amplify those who are so often silenced. We need to speak up.
Yeah, it's a challenging task, I won't lie. But it's also incredibly important. Like, we can't just ignore this. The stakes are too high.
Because ultimately, the future of our digital lives and maybe even our democracy
Yeah.
depends on it. It's that serious.
And if Mala's story teaches us anything, it's that we can make a difference, even when we're up against these seemingly impossible obstacles, these huge corporations. It's still possible.
Yeah, her journey is a perfect example of, the power of resilience, how important community is, and that unwavering belief in a better future. We have to keep believing.
And it reminds us that even small acts of resistance, just doing something, anything, can create this ripple effect, like
Yeah.
a butterfly effect, creating waves of change that spread far beyond our little individual bubbles.
That's a great way to put it. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we really want to leave you with this final thought, maybe even a challenge.
What will you do? What actions will you take to shape the digital world into something more equitable, more just, more inclusive?
How will you use your voice, your actions, your choices to create a digital world where everyone can truly thrive? What will your impact be?
It all comes down to this. The power to create change is within each and every one of us. We all have that power.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everybody. It's been an incredible journey, a real eye-opener, and we really hope you'll continue exploring these important questions. Even after the episode is over, keep thinking about it.
And remember, even when things feel complicated, even when you're facing challenges, there's always hope. Never give up hope.
So until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better digital future for everyone. We'll see you all next time.